Karen mocks black woman in a store, then finds out she owns the company. Martin had always loved the bustle of new beginnings, the hum of a fresh opportunity, the tinkling of hopes that quietly, steadily rise through adversity. Every morning felt like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. On an overcast Tuesday, the sky tinted a light gray with clouds drifting lazily overhead. She pulled into the parking lot of a newly opened clothing store on the outskirts of the city. The store itself was a part of a larger chain that she had dedicated years of her life to building, though most people wouldn't know that just by looking at her. Had learned long ago that sometimes, to truly gauge an environment, you had to step inside without fanfare, without the preconceived notions that come along with fancy titles and polished introductions. As she opened the car door and stepped onto the asphalt, a breeze ruffled the hem of her linen dress. She glanced at the store's simple sign. A wave of quiet pride washed over her. She had come a long way since her early days, dreaming about a brand that represented diversity and strength. True, she had partners and a small team of investors who had helped her. This was far from a solo endeavor, but her vision was always there, guiding each step. This particular store was a test location meant to appeal to a diverse demographic. The neighborhood included a blend of cultural backgrounds, a perfect testing ground for new style lines. Was here incognito, wearing no fancy jewelry or designer bag, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. She donned comfortable sandals and carried a plain canvas tote on her shoulder. The decision to appear as an ordinary customer was intentional. She wanted to see how staff treated people of all walks of life, whether everyone felt welcomed or if some invisible lines still divided them. Months of training, countless interviews, and extensive protocols had been put in place to ensure every customer was received with warmth and dignity. Still, something told her to see it for herself. Inside, the store was bright and airy. Contemporary music played softly through well-placed speakers, and display racks featured pastel and earth-toned clothes that called to mind a sense of calm. Seasonal offers were advertised with large yet tasteful signs. Glanced around, noticing a couple of young mothers perusing the children's section, a teenager flipping through denim jackets, and an older man studying a hat rack. A young sales associate stood behind the main checkout counter, busy scanning items for a customer. Another was assisting someone near the fitting rooms. It was the sales associate in the center of the store who caught attention. She recognized him from a corporate workshop. His name was. He was a friendly, bright-eyed man in his early 20s, and he had a knack for relating to customers of all backgrounds. This was good news for. One of her priorities was hiring staff who exuded genuine kindness rather than a fake, plastered-on smile. She lingered near a display of blouses, occasionally running her fingers over the material to check the quality. She had personally approved these pieces weeks before, and she was glad to see they looked just as promising on the shelf as they had in the design studio. She was about to pick up one blouse in a muted peach color when she heard a voice from behind her. It was a woman, her tone unmistakably annoyed. "Excuse me, but is anyone going to help me here?" Turned slightly. The woman looked to be in her late 40s or early 50s, with short, crisp hair. She wore an expensive-looking blouse, pressed slacks, and sensible but clearly high-end shoes. Everything about her posture screamed impatience. The slight narrowing of her eyes seemed to suggest she believed she deserved attention above all else. Flashed her a smile and approached. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you today?" The woman, whose expression suggested that she was used to getting her way, pointed at a rack of newly arrived dresses. "I need to find a size 6, but all I see here is a bunch of 8s and 10s and a few 4s. Your store's sizing is all over the place." Calm as ever, quickly checked the rack. "Let me take a look in the back. Sometimes we run out of certain sizes on the floor. If we do have a size 6, I'll bring it out for you." The woman pursed her lips. "I'd appreciate it if you hurry." Continued to watch discreetly. Maintained his professional poise, excused himself, and headed to the stockroom. The woman ran a finger along the rack with a look of disapproval and then turned to face. "Are you waiting for a fitting room too?" She asked, casting a glance at its casual attire, gave a polite smile. "Not at the moment, just checking out the new stock." The woman eyed its outfit with cool detachment, noticing, perhaps, that it wasn't something obviously designer. Her gaze lingered momentarily on its face before she turned away with a dismissive shrug. There was something in that shrug that had seen countless times in her life, an assumption that she was just another unremarkable customer, maybe someone who didn't belong in upscale places. sighed inwardly but tried not to let it affect her. After all, she'd come here to see how things operated, not to engage in social sparring. When returned empty-handed, the woman let out a sharp exhale. "So you don't have any size 6? He shook his head apologetically. "I'm afraid we're out of stock in the back, ma'am. We've placed an order for more, but I can check another location's inventory if you'd like." She waved him off. "I don't have time to drive across town." With an exaggerated eye roll, she turned on her heel and marched toward the top section, leaving standing there with a polite, neutral expression. Could see the hint of disappointment flicker across his features. Nobody liked dealing with rude customers, but part of the retail code was to remain calm and accommodating. Gently touched his arm as he passed. "You handled that well," she said softly. He recognized her from the workshop and brightened. "Ms. Martin, I didn't know you were visiting today." She gave him a quick wink, bringing a finger to her lips to signal secrecy. "Incognito. Let's keep it that way for now, okay?" He nodded, understanding the drill. "Of course, let me know if you need anything." Resumed browsing the racks. She could feel the woman's presence on the other side of the store, flitting from display to display, occasionally huffing or muttering complaints under her breath about how disorganized everything was. Overheard a snippet of conversation between the woman and another associate. The woman was now asking for a manager, insisting that the store layout was confusing, and she didn't appreciate the difficulty of finding her preferred sizes. In that moment, a second thought crossed mind. This was exactly the kind of scenario that tested the store's customer service protocols. While she disliked how the woman was behaving, she also knew that training associates to remain polite and resourceful under pressure was essential. She forced herself to step back and observe, curious about how the situation would unfold. The manager on duty came out moments later. She greeted the woman politely and listened to her complaints. Through it all, the woman's tone grew increasingly condescending. Yet, remained composed and apologized for the inconvenience, offering to locate items at nearby branches or even have them shipped to the woman's home for free. It was the policy for customers who couldn't find the items they needed. "Fine," the woman said, crossing her arms. "Have them shipped, then. I can't spend my entire day rummaging through these disorganized racks." Offered a polite nod. "Of course, ma'am. Let me just ring up your shipping details at the customer service desk." The woman followed toward the service area, face pinched, though she seemed slightly by the concession. Decided this was a perfect time to continue her own browsing, so as not to give herself away or disrupt the employees' routines. She ran her fingers over some dresses made from recycled materials, an initiative she was particularly proud of, smiling at how well the fabric felt. She picked one out in a deep olive color, deciding she might purchase it herself before leaving. A few minutes later, she was by the accessories section, studying a lovely display of scarves, when a sudden, sharp voice jolted her from her thoughts. "Where is the restroom in this place? The signage is horrible," the woman demanded, addressing no one in particular. Looked up to see the woman's icy stare directed at her. Before she could respond, the woman stepped closer, and this time there was no polite pretense. The woman's gaze flicked from hair to her sandals, taking in every detail of her appearance with an air of thinly veiled contempt. "Well," the woman snapped, "are you going to tell me where the restroom is or not?" Set down a scarf and faced her. "I'm not actually an employee here, ma'am," she said evenly. "But I believe the restroom is past the children's section, to the right." The woman's cheeks flushed. She seemed unsettled, as though she had expected to cower or jump to attention. "You look like you work here," she said flatly, her tone implying that a black woman dressed casually must be an employee in her eyes. His expression remained calm. "I'm just a customer like you. But I hope that helps you find your way." The woman flared her nostrils, eyes narrowing. "Fine." She turned and left without another word, her heels clicking harshly against the polished floor. Watched her go, her own heart beating with a mixture of frustration and resolve. She hadn't faced overt rudeness like that in quite some time. Microaggressions were more common, subtle remarks or assumptions that chipped away at her composure. But this woman had practically barked at her. It reminded of how far society still had to go in treating people with basic respect, no matter their skin color or how they dressed. She took a deep breath, letting the moment pass. Her goal here wasn't to confront the woman or spark a heated discussion. She was here to see how her staff managed, how the store operated, and to ensure the policies she'd worked so hard on were being followed. If anything, this situation only reinforced the need for a strong, clear emphasis on respect in her company culture. Not long afterward, decided she'd seen enough of how the day-to-day operations were running, was handling the woman's complaints with impeccable professionalism, was assisting other customers, and the entire staff seemed to be on top of their duties. Picked up the olive dress and went to pay at the register, choosing the line with the least number of people waiting. As she stood there, she noticed that the woman was still lingering near the service desk, complaining about shipping times, the quality of certain items, and even how another associate had failed to greet her in a timely manner. It kept her expression neutral. She could have intervened, explained who she was, even apologized personally, but something told her that it wouldn't make a difference. The woman seemed determined to be dissatisfied. Moreover, revealing her identity too soon might undermine the experiment of incognito observation. When it was her turn to pay, she smiled warmly at the cashier, a young woman named. "Hello," said, placing the dress on the counter. "Hello, did you find everything okay today?" asked, scanning the tag, nodded. "Yes, thank you, everyone's been really helpful." She didn't mention the woman. Instead, she quickly paid and collected her shopping bag. She noticed the slight tension in his eyes, perhaps from the commotion caused by that same woman, yet still projected a friendly demeanor. With that, left the store, her mind swirling with a mix of pride for her well-trained staff and a lingering sadness at how easily people could be hateful or dismissive. The entire incident reminded her of times in her life when she had to endure belittlement, especially as a black woman trying to break into an industry dominated by people who looked nothing like her. But she also felt gratitude for how far she'd come and how determined she was to keep pushing for change. Outside, the gray sky had given way to patches of blue, and a late morning sun brightened the rows of parked cars. Was about to head to her vehicle when, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the woman exit the store. She seemed agitated, rummaging through her handbag. Then she stalked across the parking lot with her phone pressed to her ear. Could hear her voice carrying across the asphalt, complaining loudly, likely to a friend or family member, about how incompetent the store was. Sighed and continued to her car, placing her new purchase gently on the passenger seat. She sat for a moment, leaning her head back against the headrest, reflecting on the swirl of emotions the morning had brought. She wondered about the woman's life, what might have happened to make her so sour, so quick to belittle others. Though there was no excuse for her behavior, had learned over time that people's rude exteriors often masked insecurities or pain. She tried when she could to find empathy. Not sympathy exactly, but a recognition that hateful attitudes often stemmed from fear or a sense of inadequacy. Deciding she'd done enough observations for the day, started the engine and pulled out of the lot. She had some upcoming meetings back at corporate headquarters. The official grand opening of this new branch was scheduled for next week, and she wanted to finalize some additional promotions and philanthropic tie-ins. After all, every store opening was also an opportunity to give back to the community, whether that meant supporting local food drives or sponsoring community events. As she drove, the cityscape began to thicken. High-rise office buildings competed for space, and the roads buzzed with midday traffic. She recalled a time she couldn't afford to put gas in her old sedan, let alone drive a new model through the heart of a bustling downtown. The memory brought a small smile to her face. Even the frustration she felt from that rude interaction took on a new perspective. She had triumphed over far worse. At headquarters, parked in her reserved spot, a perk she rarely thought about but had come to appreciate. The wide glass doors slid open as she stepped inside, revealing a sleek lobby. Large windows let in natural light that shone on modern furniture, and the reception area was decorated with bright floral arrangements. The receptionist, Ella, greeted warmly, standing as she arrived. "Good afternoon, Ms. Martin. Your conference room is set up, and the design team is already waiting for you." Thanked her and made her way upstairs. Her office was minimalist in design, but punctuated by personal touches. A framed photo of her parents, a small plaque with an inspiring quote, and a crystal award from a local business association. She set her store purchase on a chair in the corner before stepping into the conference room. There, she joined half a dozen individuals whose faces lit up when she entered. 2 hours of brainstorming ensued, filled with discussions on new advertising campaigns, expansions of the brand's social media presence, and philanthropic partnerships. Its mind, usually razor-sharp in these sessions, drifted from time to time, replaying the morning's events. She didn't bring it up in the meeting, but her associates could sense something lingering beneath her composed exterior. Finally, after concluding the discussion, she spoke. "Before everyone leaves, I want to mention something I observed today at our new location. We had an unpleasant customer interaction, and while the staff handled it well, it reminded me that we need to stay vigilant in our commitment to inclusivity and respect." Heads nodded around the table. This was a core part of the company's mission, something they had all signed on for. "We should consider adding a brief training module focusing on unconscious bias," continued. "Even if our staff did everything right, it never hurts to reinforce the importance of empathy and understanding in every single interaction." One of the team members jotted notes quickly. Another looked up thoughtfully. "We can incorporate real-life scenarios, maybe in the next monthly training session." Gave a small smile. "Perfect, thank you." As people filed out, approached privately. "Is everything okay? You seem a bit preoccupied." Exhaled slowly. "Just witnessing firsthand how some people still behave these days, it's disheartening." Placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You built this brand on the idea that everyone deserves respect and a place where they feel seen. That's still at the core of everything we do." "I know," said nodding, "but there's always more work to be done." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of tasks and emails. By the time was driving home, her earlier frustration had settled into a quiet resolve. She was determined to keep pushing boundaries to ensure that her stores were safe spaces for customers and staff alike. She was also thinking about the official grand opening event. Typically, she would do a ribbon-cutting ceremony, greet a few local dignitaries, talk to the press. But now, she wanted to go back to that very store in a more official capacity, to stand with her staff and show them that their experiences, their struggles with difficult customers, were recognized and supported by the higher-ups. A few days later, the store was buzzing with excitement as the grand opening approached. Local news outlets, social media influencers, and a handful of city council members had been invited to attend. The plan was to have a short ceremony in front of the store, complete with music, free refreshments, and a short speech from the founder herself, Martin. That morning, dressed in a stylish but understated suit in a deep navy blue. She chose comfortable heels, and though she wore more refined jewelry than she had the other day, she still opted for a tasteful approach that didn't scream elitism. She wanted to be approachable, someone customers and staff alike felt they could talk to. When she arrived, the parking lot was already half full with cars. A small stage was set up near the entrance, and a banner reading, "Grand Opening Celebration," flapped gently in the breeze. She stepped out of her car and was immediately greeted by, who had been informed ahead of time that she was coming in an official capacity. He led her to the store entrance where, and the rest of the team were finalizing last-minute preparations. Bright balloons in the company's signature colors adorned the walkway. A local radio station had set up a small booth to broadcast live from the event, playing upbeat music that got the onlookers tapping their feet. Smiled, seeing the energy and excitement in the air. This was the fruit of so much labor and passion. She shook hands with a local, posed for a few photos, and was just about to head onto the small stage to make her speech when she heard a familiarly sharp voice ring out from behind the crowd. "Isn't anyone going to help me with my bags? I've been waiting here forever." His heart skipped a beat. She leaned sideways to glance toward the voice. Sure enough, it was the same woman from the other day. She had an armful of clothing items, tags still on them, and a scowl etched into her face. Two store associates were attempting to speak to her, but she was clearly in one of her scolding modes. Caught up in the swirl of the grand opening ceremony, had not expected to see that woman here again, let alone right now. She felt an immediate tightening in her chest, a reflexive bracing against another onslaught of negativity. But a curious determination her. She decided she needed to address this situation personally. Inhaling deeply, she excused herself from the local official she'd been chatting with and navigated around the small crowd to where the woman stood. Who had been nearest to her instinctively joined as if to provide backup or at least moral support. "Ma'am," said gently, projecting an air of calm authority, "is there something we can help you with?" The woman turned, her eyebrows raised in annoyance, and for a split second her gaze settled on his face. She didn't recognize her from before, at least not immediately, or if she did, she gave no sign. "These items I bought." The woman thrust the clothing forward. "I decided they won't do it, and I've been trying to return them for the last 10 minutes, but everyone is so focused on this grand opening nonsense that they're ignoring paying customers. Rick glanced behind the woman and spotted the return counter staffed by. Two other customers were in line, but no one appeared to be ignoring her. She noticed, too, that the woman's arms were laden with items clearly past the typical return window. Some were from last season's collection, and at least one looked worn. But she maintained her polite demeanor. "I'm sorry you've had to wait," said. "We're a bit busy with the event, but I assure you our staff can help you process your returns as quickly as possible." The woman shot her a condescending look. "Yes, well, I'd appreciate some timely service. These items are in perfectly fine condition, and I have the receipts for most of them, and I'd like my money back right away." Noticing his involvement, signaled for the woman to come forward to the counter, where the line had shortened. Watched as the woman stalked over, practically shoving the clothes into his hands. Moved to follow but placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. She wanted to see how managed this on her own. Once again, the woman was in full complaint mode. "You'll see some of these items might not match the receipts exactly, but that's just because the barcodes are confusing. I've had this store credit from a previous purchase, and I expect a full cash refund now, no more store credits. This store has wasted enough of my time." Bless her patience, carefully inspected the items. She explained that per store policy, returns without original receipts or those beyond the return window could only be granted as store credit. A few items were even from older lines that the store no longer carried. The woman seemed to bristle at this explanation, her face reddening with each word. "This is outrageous," she hissed, practically trembling with anger. "I cannot believe this store is run so poorly. Do you know who I am?" Observed from a short distance, arms folded in a composed stance. She considered stepping in, but something told her it was crucial that she let follow protocol. The woman's hostility was on full display. Remained calm. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. If you'd like, I can call over our manager to discuss any exceptions. But I can't override the system without manager approval." The woman tossed her hair back and scoffed. "Don't bother. I've had it with this place. I'll make sure everyone knows how terrible your store is. I'll post reviews, I'll call the corporate line, and we'll see how you like it when your superiors hear about your attitude." Rick finally decided it was time to intervene. She stepped forward, her voice kind but firm. "I understand you're upset, ma'am. We do have policies in place, as every store does, but we're also open to resolving this in the most reasonable way possible." The woman spun around, her eyes widening in recognition, her gaze flickering as she placed from their previous interaction. "You again," she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "Why are you always hovering around? Are you some kind of manager now?" Offered a cool smile. "As a matter of fact, yes, you could say I manage things around here." She paused, letting the significance of her words hang in the air for a beat. "I'm Martin, the founder of this company." The woman froze, her mouth slightly ajar, the color draining from her face. She tried to speak, but only managed to mouth incoherent syllables. It was as if she had seen a ghost. The staff, on the other hand, looked both astonished and relieved. Many of them knew that the founder was present, but they hadn't expected her to step in at the return counter so dramatically. A few customers nearby had paused to watch. Continued, her tone unwavering yet measured. "I remember you from a few days ago, when you treated me quite rudely even though I was merely another customer in your eyes. And now, you're here on our grand opening day, continuing to insult my staff and disregard our policies." The woman's mouth snapped shut. Then she stammered, I had no idea who you were. Her eyes darted around, searching for some lifeline to rescue her from the embarrassment. Held her gaze. "I'm aware you didn't know who I was, but it shouldn't matter. We strive to treat everyone with respect here, regardless of whether they're a customer, an employee, or the founder of the company. I'm sorry you couldn't find the items in your size the other day. I'm sorry if waiting to make a return inconveniences you. However, your behavior toward our staff has been unacceptable." The woman's cheeks flamed pink, her posture deflating. The crowd that had gathered was respectful enough not to cheer or sneer, but there was a palpable energy, like an overdue moment of reckoning was unfolding before them. Gently gestured toward the items. "We're still willing to work with you on the returns that fall within our policies, but we cannot allow you to mistreat our employees any longer." Her voice gained a firmer edge. "If you continue speaking to them or other customers in such a hostile manner, we'll have to ask you to leave." For a moment it looked like the woman might burst into tears. Her eyes glistened and her lip trembled. She took a small step back from the counter, trying to clutch her composure. I apologize if I came off as rude, she managed, her words wobbling with mortification. I just had a lot going on lately and softened her expression slightly, aware that public humiliation, even if well-deserved, could compound a person's negative feelings rather than lead to understanding. Look, she said quietly, we all have bad days, but you can't take that out on people who are doing their jobs and trying to help. If you'd still like to process your return, we'll help you with whatever is within our guidelines. The woman glanced then at the floor. She nodded stiffly and pushed the items forward without another word. Resumed scanning them, explaining which ones qualified for a refund and which did not. The entire scene felt surreal, like a live demonstration of the very moral lessons wanted her brand to represent. Once the transaction was finished, the woman offered a barely audible thank you. Then she gripped her receipt tightly and turned to leave the store. She paused just once, glancing as if she wanted to say something more. But no words came, and she hurried out, head lowered, disappearing into the parking lot. For a few seconds, the store was filled with a stunned silence. Then some of the onlookers returned to browsing, as though trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed that tense exchange. Looked at the staff, each of them standing a little taller now, relieved by the knowledge that the founder had their back. She then locked eyes with, "You okay?" Nodded, "I'm fine, thank you, Ms. Martin." Stepped closer. That was intense. Exhaled slowly. "I've dealt with worse, but it's a good reminder of why we emphasize kindness." She could feel her heartbeat slowing, the adrenaline fading. Within moments, the store manager arrived. She'd been outside helping coordinate the ribbon cutting, but hurried in once she caught wind of a commotion. "Everything all right?" she asked, glancing around. Gave her a reassuring smile. "Yes, we just had a challenging customer situation. The team handled it well. Let's proceed with the ceremony, shall we?" Outside, the gathered crowd was still waiting. A local reporter approached, wanting for the grand opening. Obliged politely, praising the staff, the store's community-focused initiatives, and the brand's ongoing commitment to inclusivity. She stood on the small stage, took a pair of large ceremonial scissors, and cut the ribbon alongside and a couple of city representatives. Cheers erupted, and a sense of collective pride filled the air. After the applause subsided, cleared her throat, speaking into the microphone. "Thank you all for being here today. This new store is part of our company's growing effort to reach more neighborhoods with fashionable, high-quality clothing at fair prices. But it's about more than just clothes. It's about building an environment where everyone feels welcome. We believe in treating every person who walks through our doors with dignity." She hesitated for a moment, recalling the incident that had just taken place. The memory still tugged at her, but she pressed on. That might sound like a simple notion, but it's not always easy. It takes dedication, empathy, and sometimes a willingness to confront uncomfortable situations. Yet, I believe we can do it. And I want to thank our employees who show up every day to make that happen. A wave of applause rippled through the onlookers, gave a thumbs up from the edge of the stage, beamed. Others clapped, and at least one person whistled enthusiastically. When the ceremony concluded, moved through the crowd, greeting people and responding to questions from the press. She spoke to a local news anchor about the brand's philanthropic efforts, mentioning a partnership with a community center to provide free clothing to people in transitional housing. As she finished, she noticed a tall, middle-aged man with warm brown eyes approaching her. He introduced himself as James, a local business columnist. "Ms. Martin," he said, "I'm writing a feature on successful entrepreneurs in this region. Your brand has made a real splash. I'd love to interview you sometime." Smiled and handed him her business card. "I'd be happy to schedule something. I'm grateful for the chance to tell our story." Before they could say more, appeared, gesturing toward a small group of store employees who had gathered in a side area near the children's section for a team photo. Excused herself and joined them, posing for pictures that would be posted on the company's social media channels. In each snapshot, she stood in the middle, flanked by smiling faces, all unified by the same values she held dear. Eventually, the event wound down. People trickled out of the store, arms full of new purchases. The staff began cleaning up the balloons and folding the now-cut ribbon. Found herself sitting on a small bench near the store entrance, watching the last remnants of the celebration fade. The day had been an emotional, from the pride of opening another store to the tension of publicly confronting a rude customer. approached with a bottle of water and offered it to. You must be tired, that was quite a day. Nodded, accepting the drink gratefully. I'm a bit worn out, but also energized by everything I've seen. She glanced around at the bright, inviting store. You all did a wonderful job. The customers seemed happy, and the staff handled that ugly situation with professionalism. Leaned against a nearby display shelf. That woman, I just can't believe she showed up today of all days. Let out a slight laugh. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs. She didn't know who I was the other day, and honestly, that's fine. People shouldn't need to know a title to treat someone with decency. But at least it opened her eyes, maybe. Nodded solemnly, agreed. The store manager then checked her watch. We're closing in an hour since it's Sunday. I've got an end-of-day report to finalize. But before I go, I wanted to say thank you for stepping in, for protecting, and for creating a space where we can do our best. Smiled, it's not just me. It's all of us. As returned to her duties, wandered through the aisles once more. She stopped by the same display of blouses where she had encountered the rude woman days earlier. The memory still stung, but in a way, it only fueled her determination to expand her brand's presence in more communities. She wanted these stores to stand as beacons of respect and warmth. And if someone like that woman wanted to come in, they would still be welcomed, but they'd have to leave their hateful attitudes at the door. Finally, she headed out, the sun dipping low in the sky, painting the horizon with streaks of pink and orange. She decided to walk around to the back of the store, where a small garden area had been planted, a detail she'd insisted on, hoping to provide a peaceful spot for employees to take breaks. The garden was modest but well kept, with bright seasonal flowers that nodded gently in the evening breeze. Found a small bench under a flowering tree and sat down. She let out a long exhale, feeling the day's tension melt away. Her mind drifted to the past, remembering when she was just a teenager working part-time in a retail shop. The manager there had treated her poorly, always watching her closely as if expecting her to steal. Customers would sometimes dismiss her if she tried to help, preferring to speak to a white employee instead. Those experiences had stung, but they also ignited a fire within her to create something better. A store where employees and customers of all races and backgrounds felt genuinely respected. Closing her eyes, reflected on the powerful irony of today's moment. The woman who had dismissed her as a nobody, only to discover that she was the owner of the entire company. It was a stark reminder of how quickly judgments can crumble when confronted with reality. The moral lesson was clear. Treat everyone with dignity, for you never truly know who they are or the journey they've walked. Back at home later that evening, indulged in a comforting routine. She brewed a cup of chamomile tea, slipped off her heels, and curled up on the couch in her living room. Warm lamplight cast soft shadows on her, which were brimming with volumes about entrepreneurship, social justice, and personal development. The day's events replayed in her mind, but she tried to distill them into a sense of gratitude rather than anger. She pulled out her journal, a small leather-bound notebook she kept to process her thoughts. She wrote down a quick summary of what had happened, focusing on the lessons learned. Then she wrote a few lines about compassion. Despite the rude woman's behavior, found herself hoping that this experience might lead her to reflect and change. It was a long shot, but one never knew. The seeds of empathy could sprout in the of places. In the following weeks, business at the new store flourished, and her team reported strong sales, positive customer feedback, and minimal turnover. Word spread about the grand opening event and how the founder had made a personal appearance, further solidifying the store's connection to the community. Visited occasionally, sometimes in an official capacity and sometimes incognito, always to check on how things were running. She never encountered that woman again. Sometimes she wondered what became of her, if she'd shared her humiliating experience with friends, or if she'd simply tried to forget it ever happened. One day, as was walking through the offices at corporate headquarters, she was approached by from the training department. He handed her a draft of a new training module focusing on empathy and unconscious bias. "I'd love your feedback," he said. "We included a fictional scenario where a customer is rude to a staff member because of assumptions about their role." They flipped through the pages, impressed with the detail and care. "This looks good. We should definitely roll this out company-wide, and let's add a section on real-life stories. We don't need to name names, but I think employees would appreciate hearing about the situation we encountered and how it was resolved. It humanizes the policies." Grinned, "Absolutely. I'll see what I can do. Later, sat in her office, reviewing various reports. Everything was looking positive. Sales projections were up, employee satisfaction scores were improving, and the brand was establishing itself as a leader in ethical retail practices. She felt that familiar tug of pride, but also the weight of responsibility. There was still so much to do to make the industry more equitable and compassionate. During a break, she found her thoughts drifting back to that single moment when the woman realized was the owner. The image replayed in her mind. The woman's shocked expression, the immediate flush of her cheeks, the realization that all her preconceived notions had led her astray. Remembered the swirl of emotions in the store that day, a mixture of tension, vindication, and sorrow for the ignorance displayed. Ignorance, believed, was not a fixed state, but a condition that could be changed with the right information and introspection. She wondered if, somewhere in that woman's life, she was reevaluating her biases, thinking twice before snapping at a stranger. Or maybe not. Maybe she was rationalizing the incident to preserve her ego. Either way, knew she had done what she could do, not just in defending herself and her staff, but also in demonstrating a lesson that might resonate beyond that single day. She glanced at a framed photo on her desk, one taken at the store's opening featuring the entire team, and were side by side, beaming with pride. Stood behind them, arms casually draped over two other associates. They looked like a family, united by a common purpose. That sense of belonging was precisely what had wanted to foster when she first dreamed of starting her own line. While the incident with the rude customer was jarring, it was also an opportunity to reaffirm the store's values. Moments of conflict can either break a system or strengthen it, depending on how they're handled. In the months that followed, new store openings in other cities carried forward the same model of inclusive training and community outreach. Employees were encouraged to take part in diversity workshops. Managers hosted open forums where staff could discuss their experiences and suggest improvements. Herself made appearances at various locations, always making a point to interact with employees at every level, from the stockroom to the sales floor. Through all these changes, a story began to circulate around the company, repeated in break rooms and staff newsletters. The time a rude customer told off a black woman in the store, only to discover she was speaking to the owner. Each retelling carried the same moral. You never know who someone is, and you never know the power of a single act of kindness or cruelty. While the details occasionally got exaggerated in the retelling, some said the woman threw clothes on the floor, others claimed she'd hurled racist slurs, knew the truth of what transpired. She let the story run its course because, even in its more dramatized forms, it drove home the point: treat everyone with dignity. One day, approached during a routine store visit and shared that she had started volunteering at a local nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated women gain job skills. I realized how fortunate I am to work in a place where the environment is supportive, explained, eyes shining. And I wanted to give back to help other women find opportunities in workplaces where they won't be judged just by their past or their appearance. I felt a surge of pride. That's wonderful. I'm so glad you found a way to extend our core values outside the store. Their conversation reminded that every positive change begins with individuals taking small steps. She often thought back to the days when she was younger, working jobs where she felt invisible. Now, her company gave people like, and many others, not just employment, but a sense of belonging and purpose. That, she decided, was worth all the challenges. And so life continued. New lines were designed, old ones phased out. The brand hosted charity fashion shows and partnered with local artisans to create one-of-a-kind accessories. Each initiative carried signature vision, a vision where diversity was celebrated and respect was the currency of every transaction. Whenever visited a store, she was sometimes recognized by customers who had seen her in ads or read about her in business profiles. But she still liked those moments when she could slip in, relatively unnoticed, and see how people truly behaved when they thought no one was watching. Inevitably, she encountered other rude customers, although never quite as dramatic as the woman who had become something of a legend. In most cases, the staff's training and compassion effectively de-escalated tense situations. And sometimes, herself stepped in, not as a looming authority, but as a gentle reminder of what the store stood for. She would introduce herself if needed, but more often she found that a simple listening ear and an understanding nod could diffuse hostility. Late one evening, as wrapped up some paperwork at her office, she received an unexpected call from James, the local business columnist who had expressed interest in profiling her. "I've been researching your company and talking to some of your employees," he said. "It's really remarkable what you've built. I'd like to run a front-page story in the Sunday edition." Leaned back in her chair, heart fluttering with excitement. "That would be an honor," she replied. "Thank you." Over the next few weeks, they worked together on the article, James conducting interviews with various team members. The piece that eventually ran was titled, "Building an Empire of Empathy: How Martin's Brand is Redefining Retail." It contained anecdotes from employees who felt supported, stories of customers who found renewed confidence, and a candid account of his own journey from humble beginnings to a pioneering entrepreneur. Near the end of the article, James included a short paragraph about the encounter with a rude customer who misjudged, though he didn't name the woman or delve into sensational details. Instead, he framed it as a powerful lesson about the importance of kindness. When read the final piece, she felt tears prick at her eyes. Not of sadness, but of a profound gratitude for how her life had unfolded and for the people who had become part of her mission. She set the newspaper aside and gazed out her office window. The city lights shimmered in the distance, a tapestry of possibilities that she had once only dreamed of. She thought about the woman again, about how that one moment of ugliness had been transformed into an example of growth and change throughout the company. Life was full of such turning points, she mused, brief encounters that tested one's commitment to compassion. And sometimes the best revenge against prejudice wasn't anger or retribution, but simply standing firm in your worth and letting truth speak for itself. Before heading home, took a few moments to write a memo to the entire company. She thanked them for their continued dedication and praised the results from recent customer satisfaction surveys, which indicated that more than 90% of customers felt well treated in their stores. She ended the memo with a line that would soon become the company's unofficial mantra: "We rise by lifting others, and we thrive by treating all with dignity." In the quiet of the empty office, she emailed it out to everyone: store managers, warehouse workers, sales associates, and executives alike. Then she shut down her computer, turned off the lights, and walked out into the night, a sense of calm fulfillment settling over her. In the end, Karen mocks black woman in a store, then finds out she owns the company. Became more than just a shocking headline. It became a reminder that behind every stranger is a story, and behind every act of disrespect is a chance to show grace, or to stand your ground in the face of ignorance. For the incident was both a test of her resilience and a testament to the values she hoped her company would spread. And spread they did. Over time, her clothing brand grew into a nationwide presence, each store reflecting the same spirit she had cultivated from the start. Employees who came and went carried those values of respect and empathy into the world, influencing other workplaces and communities. Customers, too, noticed the difference, frequenting the stores not just for the merchandise, but for the uplifting environment. For her part, continued to move quietly through her life, attending board meetings, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and sometimes slipping into her own stores unannounced to see if everything was still on track. She knew there would always be people like that woman, people who assumed too much and cared too little. But she also knew that each time her staff responded with courtesy and strength, it chipped away at bigotry's hold on the world. Years later, when asked by a rising entrepreneur how she managed to stay so composed in the face of discrimination and outright rudeness, smiled thoughtfully and said, "I learned a long time ago that the best way to counter hatred is with unwavering self-respect and kindness. You can't always change someone else's heart, but you can definitely decide who you want to be when confronted by their ignorance. And sometimes you might just surprise them and yourself by the power you truly hold."